Greetings, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been aviation. Ever since I stood on my Grandpa Andy's car, watched 707s and DC-8s landing at Los Angeles International Airport. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, flew KC-135s for 24 and a half years, helped create the KC-135 Weapons School, and also taught campaign planning at the Joint Forces Staff College. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most intriguing and fascinating pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extraordinary and extreme military, commercial, and even general aviation events and experiences? Our purpose is to show how does the aviation world really work and improve critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. In the case of a lot of our military vets, this is the first time they've ever told their stories, and in some ways allows these military folks to kind of come to closure with some of the events of their past. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show is brought to you by the book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, found in all four formats on Amazon: hardback, softback, Kindle, and Audible. Just letting you know, the softback version has the 32 pictures in black and white, vice color. This book gives you a behind-the-scenes look at air refueling planning during 4 wars and a lot of contingency operations. A really great look at how air mobility works. This episode is also sponsored by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are very detailed aircraft profiles of your favorite airplanes printed on vinyl, 4, 6, and 8 feet that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. We also do custom work with your favorite airplane with your name, weapons load, unit number, tail number, whatever you want. Go by wallpilot.com and take a look at some of these great prints. This week we buried a great American, folks, and he's got a great story of courage, innovation, and airmanship during one of the greatest raids in Air Force history. But this raid was not without sacrifice. He saved lives. Merlin was doing his magic during one day in a long war decades ago. And why I want you to never lose sight of your history and heritage. Grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Frustration. That's what everybody is feeling at this time. Frustration on a level that is almost unimaginable. Even though the best leaders ever in the Air Force commanding these units, everyone is feeling frustrated. You cannot fight and win against 2 things. And those 2 things are, 1, the weather. Sun Tzu warns us about that. And 2, your own government. The military was fighting against our own government. Now, let's talk about the weather for just a moment. March is monsoon season. They're having torrential rainstorms and low clouds below 500 feet with big mountains everywhere, and you just can't fly through that. They didn't have the technology that we have now with low-level navigation like lantern, and they didn't have precision-guided weapons that could drop down through that stuff. It was extremely frustrating for these guys. The 1940s technology of the weapons that they're using doesn't allow them to precisely hit these targets. They're still getting bombs hits like we were in World War II because a lot of the bombs were made during World War II. Some of these bombs are even rusting because they've been in this climate for so long. And the worst part of all of this is the weather folks can't predict what it's going to be like over the target area. And numerous missions are scrubbed, and they have to go to secondary targets after lugging all these bombs for 500 to 800 miles and dropping them on these secondary targets because we just didn't have the ability to predict the weather like we do now. It was unimaginable, the frustration that these guys were feeling. But the biggest frustrating point that they were dealing with was fighting our own government. They were actually having target review boards 8,000 miles away. And in these review boards, people were saying, those boys can't hit an outhouse without me approving it. Stupid stuff like that. They cannot hit and destroy some of the defenses that are placed in the target area because they're on the restricted target list. Many of these guys are getting shot down. Some of them are getting killed by air defenses that they cannot hit first. Not allowed to. And one of the national security advisors said, Hey, these are just a ploy. They're not going to use them against us. Well, 4 airplanes got shot down that week that this gentleman said that. Our fighter pilots, our Wizzos, are flying over ports and are watching our mortal enemies offload weapons into this country because they've all seen what it looks like when you have a surface-to-air missile on a cargo ship. Everyone had seen pictures of them from the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we were very familiar with these weapon systems. One of these weapon systems was relatively new, and we created a whole new mission set just to go and attack and destroy these things. SAM sites. The first SAM sites, surface-to-air missile sites, radar-directed SAM sites, showed up about this time period and were restricted targets. Couldn't fire at them until they fired at you first. Well, having bullets shot at you first is not a way to run a war. There are 3 books on my reading list that deal with this time frame, and I'll have those in the show notes and links on Amazon where you can get these. That explains all of what was happening here. And during the time frame I'm talking about, we were losing a lot of airplanes. A lot of guys were going down and either being killed MIA or in prison. And some of these guys wouldn't see freedom for 5 years. But a 4-star admiral got one of the prime targets on this restricted list to come off. And immediately our forces began planning an airstrike on it. But again, they had to wait almost 8-9 days for the weather to clear out, which gave them time to plan and replan and figure out how they were going to attack this really, really prime target. Probably the primest target in this country by far at that time period. Because for the next month and a half, our whole concentration was on this one valley where this thing was located. But sure enough, we couldn't predict the weather over the target area. And a 29 plane strike package took off and headed that way, got up there, and they found out, nuts. We can't bomb in this kind of weather. Don't have GPS guided weapons like we do now that'll go right down through the murk and hit within 3 meters of what you're aiming at. They're using gravity drop bombs and having to do Kentucky windage when they're dropping bombs at 500 knots. One of Murphy's laws of combat is your enemy has a vote on your plan and he cheats every time he plays a card. And our adversary was smart. There was 93 gun sites in this valley. They estimate that there may have been up to 183 individual guns defending this one target. There were SAM sites all around it. I don't know how many, but you're dealing with SA-2s that have about 23-mile range. And remember, this is a new system that we are facing for the first time, and we have a new mission that we've created to deal with it. And there's a fighter base close by so that the fighters can take off and actually can loiter around the target for long periods of time while our guys are getting there with gas enough to make it home, do their mission and make it home, hopefully hit tankers in Thailand and refuel on their way back. Post-strike refueling was a big deal for these airplanes because they're burning massive amounts of gas because they're running around an afterburner everywhere they go trying to outrun these surface-to-air missiles. So the first strike package to go to this place kind of plays our cards. And now our adversary knows, hey, they're going to this place for a reason. And they're turning around and going to secondary targets. But everybody came to this valley. So let's move all of our guns and SAMs, get our MIGs ready to go after these folks because we definitely do not want this target destroyed because it'll ruin our war-making capability if it is destroyed. So there's been a delay of 8 to 9 days to strike the target due to weather. They go up there, weather scrubs the mission, and now they have to wait 2 more days because of the weather and the monsoons again to go strike this target. So the frustration level is really high, but the anticipation of going up and bombing this target is also very high. But all of the intel reports that are coming back are saying This is probably one of the most heavily defended places on the planet. And all of these guys realize we've got some folks that probably aren't going to come home from this. And believe me, folks, we talk about that. We talk about going out on missions where we were told the opening night of Desert Storm, 10% of us weren't going to come home. And this was one of those 10% missions that I'm speaking of, where 10% of the force, maybe more, may not make it back because now there is all kinds of defenses inside this valley protecting this place. During the 2-day stand down, they once again go over and over and over their plan to strike this target. And airplanes are coming from several different bases, so all of the coordination is being worked out. The airplanes are being loaded with bombs. Some of them are being loaded with air-to-air missiles. We call that self-escort, where you have a fighter that's carrying bombs, going to drop bombs on something, and then go right into the escort mission where they're going to hunt for MIGs and look for MIGs. We did this over Baghdad during the 2003 campaign. Tomcats were carrying GPS-guided bombs, Sidewinders, Sparrows, and Phoenix. And this self-escort is something fairly new in Air Force doctrine. Still do not have a gun on one of the airplanes going up there, but one of the strike aircraft does have a 20 millimeter Gatling gun on it. That gun, that 20 millimeter Gatling gun, is going to prove very lethal to our enemies when the airstrike comes off. And remember, some of the best leadership we've ever had in the Air Force in combat. They're leading this thing. They're going out on this mission, knowing that, hey, some of our guys might not come back, but showing true leadership, leading from the front. They go. Day finally comes to do the mission. And of course, the weather sucks. But the weather prognosticators say, hey, by this afternoon, if you guys take off about 1:30, it will probably be clear over the target area about 3:30 to 4 o'clock, and you'll have what you need to destroy this place. Tankers are always the first one to go, and they leave their bases and head for their air refueling areas because there's no way they're going to be able to even get up to the target area carrying the bomb loads that they're carrying without gas. So they get pre-strike refueled. There's 27 airplanes in this package. 27 fighter bombers in this package that is going to go up to this target area. That's a big package. They all have their assignments. Some are going to suppress the air defenses. Some are going to drop bombs and be the escort. Some are just there to just drop bombs and go home. But 27 airplanes head north in Thailand and get their pre-strike refueling and fill up to the gills with gas. While the package is filling up on gas, our enemy's early warning radars are watching. They can see that they're about to get invaded by a large strike package coming from Thailand. And so they're getting all their forces ready. The package comes off of the tankers, gets together in their combat spread that was tried and true at this time period, and they start heading north. The first group in the target area is there to knock back the air defenses. And they arrive in the area about 5 minutes before all of the bombers do. And they have stirred up a hornet's nest. From 45 miles away, they can tell where the target is because of the amount of anti-aircraft fire that is bursting in front of them. Matter of fact, one pilot says about 75 miles away, I could see it. And one of our heroes in this package, 75 miles away, gets hit hard by an 85 millimeter shell. He feels the airplane shake. Guy in the back seat feels the airplane shake. Pilot says, hey, are you all right back there? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not injured. And they kind of do a battle damage check and they figure, okay, airplane's still flying. I think we're good. Let's keep going on. And they stay with the strike package. The first flight of 4 that arrive in the area, the first flight of 4 in this 27 airplane package arrives in the area early, about 5 minutes early. And they can see this is going to be a tough one to get through. And sure enough, as they are suppressing the enemy air defenses, the flight lead and his wingman both get shot down. The flight lead and wingman of Lincoln Flight both get shot down. The 3 crew members become POWs. They literally land in the target area and are captured immediately. No way to go rescue them, which leaves only his element lead and his wingman as the surface-to-air missile suppression flight left to take care of all these guns and SAMs and MIGs that are coming. So Merlin and Mike start doing their magic. They find a radar that is threatening their airplane, fire an anti-radiation, a Shrike missile at it, and take it out. Merlin and Mike's wingman goes in, drops a whole load of bombs on top of the SAM site and destroys it. And then they begin trolling for other sites, which are everywhere. And it's about this time that the strike package shows up. The strikers all begin climbing to begin their 60-degree dive bomb passes at the target area as two MiG-21s fly right in front of them. One pilot that's on his bomb delivery actually pulls off toward one of the MiG-21s. It goes off out of the target area, and he goes back to his delivery and actually drops his bombs on the target area. As he's pulling off target, he sees a flight of 4 MiGs, and he goes after them. And in an Air Force first, this pilot shoots down 2 of these MiGs with his 20-millimeter gun. Bam, bam. And one of the MiGs is flown by a North Korean pilot. And that North Korean pilot does not get out of the airplane. And this particular pilot's wingman sees the airplane hit the ground. Not too sure what happens to the second one because it kind of goes over the top of his canopy and they lose sight of it because they're just trying to get out of the area because of all the flak. And now the next group of airplanes show up and they begin their dive bombing passes. And during their pass, one airplane is hit so hard that it shakes the entire airplane, and the pilot looks out and he's leaking fuel. Delivers his bombs, comes off the target, but he realizes he's leaking so much fuel, he's probably not going to make it home. Another airplane rolls in, drops its bombs. It also gets hit hard and is damaged. And all kinds of lights in the cockpit are going off telling him, here's all the troubles you've got. Electrical power, gone. One engine, messed up. But he continues flying out of the area. The wild weasels that are left, the 2 that I spoke about, Lincoln 3 and Lincoln 4, stay in the area. Lincoln 3 is hit 3 more times. His wingman is hit twice. They fire another anti-radiation missile at another SAM site, drop bombs on it, and then come around a second time and shoot it with the gun, a 20-millimeter Gatling gun, gunning a SAM site. Just say those words and your insurance rates go up. Lincoln 3 and 4 stay in the target area after the package leaves, just to make sure everybody gets out of the area, because their motto is first in, last out. And then finally, they're so beat up that they have to leave. Little do they realize that the pilot of the Weasel will win the Congressional Medal of Honor, and his EWO, electronic warfare officer, will be awarded the Air Force Cross. The wingman wins a Silver Star for this mission. There are a lot of awards for this one mission. Again, this is the very first mission to this target, and it's the most heavily defended target in enemy territory. The 2 airplanes that are leaking fuel are on their way out. One of them knows they're not going to make it out of Vietnam unless something happens. They're certainly not going to make it to a tanker. The second airplane realizes they might make it to the tanker, but one of the contracts that we have in the military is we will never leave anyone behind. We will do everything we can to get you out of a bad situation, or if you pay the ultimate sacrifice, we will come get your remains. And that's what's going through this guy's head. So he pulls up to his buddy, and they're trying to figure out, how can I help him get out of North Vietnam? And this is where the scientific method takes over. Because he's thinking about all kinds of different ways that he could be able to push this airplane out of Vietnam. Tells the aircraft, hey, get rid of your parachute that's in the tail of the airplane. Well, cuts the parachute, it comes off, tries to push with the nose that way, but the wake turbulence behind the airplane, of course the jet exhaust, it's unmanageable, can't do it. tries again to push the airplane somehow, realizes, okay, that's not going to work. And then finally comes up with an idea and says, you guys put your hook down. And they're like, wait, what? What do you want me to do? Put your hook down. I've got an idea. And on the airplane, which was also a Navy fighter as well as an Air Force fighter, they put the hook down. And our steely-eyed fighter pilot comes up behind and actually puts that hook on his windscreen and pushes the airplane. Just for a few seconds, though, because the hook not only comes down, but it goes sideways. And so about every 15 to 20 seconds, the thing would slip off the windscreen. And of course, it was damaging the windscreen because they're going 300 miles an hour at about 5,000 feet per minute down. But they figure it's going to work. And as he figures it's going to work, he loses an engine. The engine just quits because it's so damaged from the flak. Now the airplane pushing is single engine. But I'm not going to let my buddies punch out and probably become prisoners of war. And he comes back up again, single engine, pushes the hook on the other airplane, the tail hook, once again, and is starting to get spidery cracks in the windscreen. But that's the thickest piece of glass on the airplane. And that's their only option. They push for 80 miles, and at least now they are out of enemy territory, but not in friendly territory. But now they're all out of gas. Both airplanes are out of gas. At about 6,000 feet, the first airplane that was being pushed, both crew members get out. Rutan is in the back seat, and he punches out and has a terrible spinal compression because these are older ejection seats that they don't have the rockets in them. They have the shells in them. And so it's just a big bang and out you go. And he's in a lot of pain coming down in his parachute because of the ejection. His pilot, same thing, but he hurts vertebrae in his neck. Our pusher plane goes a little farther on one engine, and then finally they can't go any farther and they get out. Both of them also eject, but at least they're not in enemy territory. They're not going to become POWs. And unbeknownst to them, the rescue forces have already been alerted. The prop-driven fighters and the helos are on their way, but they land near a village. And apparently this village is a little agitated with what the Americans are doing. And they come out with dogs and rifles, and they're hunting for these four guys. Remember, Rutan's got a bad back now. He's got a compression spinal injury, and every time he moves, it hurts. But he's having to run uphill, in some cases, with his pistol in his hand in order to get away, and finally finds a fairly decent hide spot as soon as the rescue force shows up. The other three, they're getting hunted down too, but again, the rescue force shoos everybody away, and one helo picks up one crew and one helo picks up another crew. The helo crew members attend to some of their wounds as much as they can. They land at a special forces base and are put on a single helicopter back to their base. That night, these guys are in the officers' club drinking to their good fortune. Even our guy with a spinal compression, Rutan, he's in pain, but he's enjoying that he's alive. Well, folks, one of those pilots was buried this week. And this one single event has his name to it. And that event is called Pardo's Push. Last week, Bob Pardo passed away, and he was buried this week with full military honors. And the reason I know this story so well is because Rutan, the backseater in the airplane that was getting pushed, I talked to him this past week. Rutan is one of my mentors and a man that I have the utmost respect for because I met him when I was in college. Rutan was one of my ROTC instructors at Brigham Young University. And now he's 85 years old. but I used to sit around and listen to him talk about flying Phantoms with the 8th TAC Fighter Wing in the 433rd Fighter Squadron with Robin Olds as his wing commander. And he told me many a story of him flying missions over Vietnam in a 4-ship with Robin Olds leading. So this week, we laid to rest another Vietnam veteran. Showed incredible courage. Imagine, folks, being 75 miles away from a target area, knowing that you're about to stick your head into that hornet's nest because you can see the trails of the missiles, you know that the MIGs are up, and you can see the flak bursts from the 37 millimeter, 57 millimeter, 85 millimeter, and 100 millimeter guns 45 to 75 miles away. That's courage. I'm going to get shot at. I may get hurt. My job is to drop bombs on the only steel mill in North Vietnam at a place called Thai Nguyen. And this is the very first raid, and they were waiting for him. Bob Pardo was laid to rest, I believe, in Arlington Cemetery this week. Earl Amon, who was flying in the front seat with my good buddy Rutan, Bob Houghton, passed away a long time ago. So Lieutenant Colonel Steve Wayne, who is in the back seat of Bob Pardo's airplane, still alive. Bob Houghton, still alive, in their 80s. And I hope to have them on the show as guests. As a matter of fact, I talked to Bob Houghton this week, Rutan, and told him, I want to come down and interview you. He lives only about 35 minutes away from me. Now, I will tell you that Bob Pardo got in trouble for doing this. This, of course, was an untested method, and they wanted to court-martial him. And, of course, Robin Olds, being the guy that he is, the leader that he is, said, I don't think so. And years later, Bob Pardo was awarded a Silver Star for Pardo's push. We've kind of lost our heritage and our history about these kinds of things. I had a text conversation with one of my good friends who's been a guest on this show, who's got a son that is at Kunsan and a member of the 8th TAC Fighter Wing flying F-16s now. And he said something to me in this text conversation that kind of shocked me. That his son mentioned that there are people, fighter pilots at Kunsan, that have never heard of Pardo's push. And of course, he and I were kind of shocked at that because that was such an incredible event that we studied when we were going through school. This is why I do this show, though, folks. Telling these kinds of stories, knowing these people. And of course, Bob Houghton had other just phenomenal stories to tell of the time period that he was flying F-4s as a young first lieutenant. And believe it or not, folks, I found on YouTube a YouTube video that shows all 4 of these pilots, Amon, Bob Houghton, Pardo, and Wayne, standing around a tailhook, probably not too long after this event happened, and kind of discussing it. And I saw Bob Houghton as a young first lieutenant. And it was just surprising to see him that young because, of course, I met him when he was a major and later got promoted to lieutenant colonel. But, folks, you want to know what real courage is? Bob Pardo, 2 days later, was tasked to go back to the same target, the Thai Nguyen steel mill. I mentioned to you, that was target number 1 for about a month and a half. And we laid all kinds of bombs and iron on that thing. And finally, in that month and a half, steel production went to a trickle. But imagine what's going through Pardo's mind. Well, I got shot down the first time. There's all kinds of flak SAMs and MIGs up there. I guess it's good knowing what you're getting into. And all of these gentlemen from the Vietnam War are the reason, in my mind, why our Air Force is second to none now. Because all of them went into leadership positions by staying in the Air Force, and many of them went into the defense industrial complex with their lessons learned and said, we've got to change this. We have to be able to go in and hit a SAM site from a distance that they can't touch us. We have to create precision-guided bombs that can go through any kind of weather, no matter what. And I remember during the shock and awe campaign, when we had 75-mile-an-hour winds and blowing sand and dust, you couldn't see half a football field in some cases. GPS-guided weapons do not care about wind speed and sandstorms. And we uploaded GPS-guided bombs on every airplane that took off. And the general who was leading their Army defense of Baghdad said in an interview after the war, "I have never seen the use of firepower like that in my entire life." And it was during a sandstorm. And we showed him how we did it. General Rad Majid al-Hamdani, he was tasked with defending Baghdad, and they thought, oh, this sandstorm's going to slow them down. Nope, we've got precision-guided weapons and a way to see down through that stuff. So all of these men and women from the Vietnam War went on to be these great leaders, leading the air campaign of Desert Storm. Chuck Horner, Wild Weasel pilot, flying F-105s. Schwarzkopf, Army grunt in Vietnam. And they went to Lockheed. They went to Boeing. They went to Sikorsky with all of these lessons learned in their heads and created a force that is undeniably the most powerful Air Force on the planet. Now, folks, I love Air Force history. And while I was investigating and researching all of this, I found another similar situation from the Korean War. On September 15th of 1952, Robbie Reisner was escorting Thunderjets, F-84 Thunderjet fighter bombers that were attacking a chemical plant along the Yalu River near the East China Sea. During his defense of the bombers, Reisner's flight actually overflew a MiG base at Antung, China, the Antung airfield of China. And he began fighting with the MiGs over the airfield. He was at nearly supersonic speeds down at ground level, flying like 50 to 100 feet off the ground, chasing a MiG-15 from the Chinese Air Force. Little did he know that Chinese airplane had a red-headed Russian flying in it. Reisner flies down this riverbed 35 miles inside of China, and he's scoring hits on the MiG, shooting off its canopy. He set it on fire, and then all of a sudden, he chases it between two hangars at Antung Airfield. And now the whole base knows that an American is flying over this Chinese base. Well, he shoots the airplane down and it actually crashes into a row of parked fighters. But on the return flight, his wingman, First Lieutenant Joe Logan, got struck by ground fire in his fuel tanks over Antung. And he realizes he's not going to be able to make it back. They climb up to altitude, even though he's losing fuel. And in an effort to reach Kimpo Airfield, where they were flying from, Reisner attempts to push his airplane with his F-86. If you're familiar with the F-86, it has a big round intake on the front of the nose, and it kind of has a little beak on it. Well, Reisner told Logan, shut down your engine and let me push you. Of course, unprecedented, untried maneuver, never been done before. But he's trying to push Logan back to a place called Chodo Island. This island was off of the North Korean coast and had a rescue squadron there so that if anybody went down in the Yellow Sea, they could go pick them up fairly quickly. And this rescue detachment heard that they were coming and were getting ready for them. Well, every time Robbie tried to stick his nose in the exhaust of Logan's airplane, jet fuel and hydraulic fluid were spewing out and damaging Reisner's canopy and his windscreen. And he couldn't see what he was doing. The turbulence of flying the two jets so close was also a problem. But he was able to reestablish contact and push him near Chodo Island. So Logan punches out and says to Reisner, hey, I'll see you at the base tonight. And Reisner flies up to altitude and basically dead sticks his airplane into Kimpo Air Base because he runs out of gas. But he's able to make it down to his base. Well, unfortunately, Logan punches out fairly close to Chodo Island, to the shore. And all the rescue forces are getting ready to come grab him when he gets entangled in his parachute and the lines, and he drowns and doesn't make it back. As I told this story, I mentioned other players, Lincoln 3 and 4, and the Thud pilot who shoots down 2 MIGs the very first time there's a double MiG kill during the Vietnam War. And I want to talk about them for just a minute. Lincoln 3 was being piloted by Merlin Deathlison. His electronic warfare officer, or bear, was a guy by the name of Kevin Gilroy, goes by Mike. Let me read to you Merlin Deathlison's Medal of Honor citation, because it's incredible. Major Deathlison was one of a flight of F-105 aircraft engaged in a suppression mission designed to destroy a key anti-aircraft defense complex containing surface-to-air missiles, an exceptionally heavy concentration of anti-aircraft artillery, and other automatic weapons. The defensive network was situated to dominate the approach and provide protection to an important North Vietnamese industrial center that was scheduled to be attacked by fighter bombers immediately after the strike by Deathlison's flight. That's Lincoln Flight, the Weasel Flight. In an initial attack on the defensive complex, the lead aircraft was crippled and Major Deathlison's aircraft was extensively damaged by the intense enemy fire. Realizing that the success of the impending fighter bomber attack on the center now depended on his ability to effectively suppress the defensive fire, Major Deathlison ignored the enemy's overwhelming firepower and the damage to his aircraft and pressed his attack. Despite a continuing hail of anti-aircraft fire, deadly surface-to-air missiles, and counterattacks by MiG interceptors, Major Deathlison flew repeated close-range strikes to silence the enemy defensive positions with bombs and cannon fire. His action in rendering ineffective the defensive SAM and anti-aircraft artillery sites enabled the ensuing fighter bombers to strike successfully the important industrial target without loss or damage to other aircraft, thereby appreciably reducing the enemy's ability to provide essential war material. Major Deathlison's consummate skill and selfless dedication to his significant mission were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Air Force and reflect great credit upon himself and the armed forces of his country. During the Vietnam War, there was a rule about awarding medals to air crews. Merlin Deathlison gets the Congressional Medal of Honor, but his backseater, Mike Gilroy, electronic warfare officer, does not. Even though they're separated by just a few feet, Mike Gilroy is awarded the Air Force Cross. That was the rule back then. I don't know why it was done that way, because there's another weasel crew that wins these kinds of awards. That's Leo Thorsness, who gets the Congressional Medal of Honor, gets shot down before it's awarded to him, becomes a prisoner of war, and his backseater, Harold Johnson, gets another award, not the Congressional Medal of Honor. But let me read to you Mike Gilroy's Air Force Cross citation. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Title 10, Section 8742, United States Code, takes pleasure in presenting the Air Force Cross to Captain Kevin Alfred Gilroy, United States Air Force, for extraordinary heroism while serving as electronic warfare officer of an F-105 Wild Weasel aircraft of the 354th Tactical Fighter Squadron, 355th Tactical Fighter Wing, Tockley Royal Thai Air Base, engaged in a pre-strike missile suppression mission against the Thai Nguyen Steel Works in North Vietnam on March 10, 1967. On that date, Captain Gilroy guided his pilot in attacking and destroying a surface-to-air missile installation protecting one of the most important industrial complexes in North Vietnam. He accomplished this feat even after formidable hostile defenses had destroyed the lead aircraft and had crippled a second. That's Lincoln 1 and 2, both of them shot down. Though his own aircraft suffered extensive battle damage and was under constant attack by MiG interceptors, anti-aircraft artillery, automatic weapons, and small arms fire, Captain Gilroy aligned several ingenious close-range attacks on the hostile defenses at great risk to his own life. Due to his technical skill, the attacks were successful, and the strike force was able to bomb the target without loss. Through his extraordinary heroism, superb airmanship, and aggressiveness, Captain Gilroy has reflected the highest credit upon himself and the United States Air Force. Deathlison and Gilroy's wingman was a young captain by the name of Ken Bell, who retired as a brigadier general, and he receives a Silver Star for this mission. And let me read you this citation, because it's incredible too. The President of the United States, authorized by Act of Congress, July 8, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting the Silver Star to Major Kenneth Holmes Bell, United States Air Force, for gallantry in connection with military operations against an opposing force while serving as pilot of an F-105 Thunder Chief of the 355th Tactical Fighter Wing, Tak Lee Royal Thai Air Base, Thailand, Pacific Air Forces in Southeast Asia on 10 March 1967. On that date, Major Bell was a member of a surface-to-air missile suppression flight in support of a strike against a large industrial complex. Major Bell in his flight, with great courage, flew through anti-aircraft defenses which were so dense that the flight leader was downed and all three of the remaining flight members' aircraft were damaged. Major Bell's aircraft was damaged to the extent that aircraft control was marginal. However, he elected to remain in the target area, flying through a hail of flak 3 more times until he had the key missile installation shattered and burning from a series of vicious attacks. Throughout the entire flight, Major Bell exhibited complete disregard for his personal welfare in the face of overwhelming odds. By his gallantry and devotion to duty, Major Bell has reflected great credit upon himself and the United States Air Force. Years later, Bob Pardo is given the Silver Star for what he did on that 10 March 1967 day. Like most of us will tell you in the military, they look to hang you before they give you an award. And as I mentioned, Pardo, untested method, got in trouble. A lot of people wanted to hang him for damaging the airplane, losing the airplane. But Robin Olds, being the leader that he was, would have none of that. And it wasn't until years later that Bob Pardo was awarded the Silver Star. And here is the citation for that. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, July 9, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting the Silver Star to Major John R. Pardo, United States Air Force, for gallantry in connection with military operations against an opposing armed force over North Vietnam on 10 March 1967. On that date, Major Pardo was flying as the pilot of the lead element on the return from a 1,000-mile flight in which heavy flak damage was encountered. He noticed that his wingman's aircraft was in trouble and was advised that the aircraft was extremely low on fuel. Realizing that the wingman's aircraft would not make it out of North Vietnam, Major Pardo implemented maneuvers to literally push the aircraft across the border. The attempt was successful and consequently allowed the crew to avoid becoming prisoners of war. By his gallantry and devotion to duty, Major Pardo has reflected great credit upon himself and the United States Air Force. The last player I want to mention, the guy who shot down 2 MiG-17s. His name was Captain Max Brestel. If you read Jack Broughton's book, Thud Ridge, he talks about Max. He calls him his seeing eye captain. For some reason, Max Brestel had this eagle kind of vision and could see things before anybody else did. And on this 10 March 1967 mission, he guns 2 MiG-17s, and one of the MiG-17s that he shoots down, he spreads the bullets across the wings, the cockpit, and the engine. That airplane goes down and hits the ground, seen by his wingman, so it's a confirmed kill. The North Vietnamese, much later after the war, told the story of a group of MiG pilots from North Korea. They called them Z Group. And this pilot of this MiG-17 that Max Brestel shot down was one of those North Korean pilots. I found his name on the web. I can't remember his full name. His last name was Wook. But do you understand, folks, from what I've mentioned through this episode, this was actually the communist world against the free world. The Chinese were bringing in supplies. The Russians were bringing in supplies. They were coming in from all kinds of communist countries. There were Russian pilots flying the airplanes, the MiGs of North Vietnam. There was North Korean pilots. There was Chinese pilots. This was communism against the free world, particularly America. And in a way, we are kind of seeing that now. the Russians against the United States, the Chinese especially against the United States, with Chinese military-age males coming across our border. In many ways, communism against the free world Cold War has once again shown its ugly face. And we are going to have to fight that again, hopefully not here in the United States, but we'll see. I've really enjoyed telling you folks about this story and Pardo's push, particularly knowing somebody that was involved in it. I have a connection to it. Next year, early next year, I'm going to drive down to Bob Houghton's place, and I'm going to put a recorder in front of him and have him record this and so many other stories that he's told me about flying in the RAF, flying Lightnings in the RAF, flying F-106s out of Minot, as well as teaching us young kids the history and the heritage of the United States Air Force, because it's an extremely rich heritage and a great history of the things that we have done as the United States Air Force. And not just in combat, but also in humanitarian relief around the world that I've been involved with, where we had to come up with some really innovative solutions very quickly that showed some really incredible courage and airmanship like these men did on this Tynuggan Steel Mill raid on the 10th of March, 1967. This episode is financially supported by the book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, which can be found in all 4 formats on Amazon: hardback, softback, Kindle, and Audible. Fair warning, the softback version has all the pictures in black and white, not color. There are additional files that download with the Kindle and Audible versions that have all of the pictures in color that download with the book. This gives you a behind-the-scenes look at tanker planning, tanker operations in 4 wars: Desert Storm, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq, that I wrote and published via Simon & Schuster in November of 2017. The show is also financially supported by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. I actually drawn the 2 airplanes that Bob Pardo was flying and that my good friend Bob Houghton was flying with the hook down on Houghton's airplane, and those are in the show notes and are available at wallpilot.com. We have 130 plus ready to print 4, 6, and 8 foot graphics of your favorite airplanes printed on vinyl that you can peel off and put on any flat surface. Or we can do a custom graphic for you of your favorite airplane with your name on it, tail number, tail codes, weapons loads. All you have to do is just contact us through the www.wallpilot.com website. This and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit show can be found on my website at markhasara.com under the podcast pull-down box. After the first of the year, there will be a Lessons from the Cockpit show website. All of my episodes will be that you can download anytime. It will also have on there how to become a guest on the show. If you have a really compelling story and the lessons learned behind those stories, I really want to talk to you. Folks, I appreciate you tuning in and downloading this and previous episodes. I want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from the Hasara family. We look forward to talking to you again on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.